I had exactly $43 in my bank account, not $43 and some change. $43 exactly, because the man I had trusted with everything I had spent 2 years saving had emptied the rest. Every dollar. Gone, transferred quietly, methodically over the course of 3 days while I was studying for finals and trusting him completely. I found out on a Thursday morning when my card was declined at a gas station. Not a coffee shop. Not a restaurant, a gas station. $11 of fuel. Declined. I sat in that gas station parking lot and opened my banking app and stared at a number that did not make sense for so long that the attendant came outside to ask if I was okay. I was not okay. I was 22 years old. I was in my final year of college. I had $43, a full tank of humiliation, and a boyfriend who was no longer answering his phone. What I did not have, what nobody standing in that parking lot watching me could possibly have seen, was the thing that was already forming somewhere underneath the shock and the grief and the fury. An idea. My name is Mia. And what happened in the 2 years after that Thursday morning is something that the people who knew me then still talk about. Not because it is a story about money, but because it is a story about what a person discovers about herself when everything she thought she was standing on disappears at once. Stay with me, because this ending, I promise you, is one that nobody who knew me then saw coming. Including me. I want to start at the beginning, not because the beginning is dramatic, but because I think you need to understand who I was before all of this to understand what after actually meant. I grew up in a working-class household in a mid-sized city in the South. My mother, Linda, worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood, a day shift at a medical office and weekend hours at a retail store. She was not unhappy exactly, but she was tired in a way that I understood very early was connected to money. To the specific, grinding exhaustion of never quite having enough and always being one unexpected expense away from a crisis. I decided when I was 14 that I was going to go to college. Not because anyone told me to, not because it was the obvious path in my household. It wasn't. Nobody in my immediate family had finished a 4-year degree. But because I had looked at my mother's exhaustion and understood, with the clear and perhaps brutal logic of a teenager, that the difference between her life and the life I wanted was a degree. I got a partial scholarship. I took out student loans for the rest. I worked 20 hours a week at a campus cafe throughout my first 3 years to cover living expenses. I was not the best student in my program. I was a business major solidly in the middle of my class. But I was consistent and I worked harder than almost anyone I knew because I understood viscerally what the alternative looked like. And I saved. Every extra dollar I made above my monthly expenses went into a savings account that I had mentally labeled emergency fund/future. By the start of my senior year, I had $9,400 in that account. For someone in my position, that was not a small amount. That was 2 years of discipline and sacrifice and saying no to things I wanted so that I could say yes to something important later. That was the money Tyler took. Tyler and I had been together for 14 months when everything happened. He was charming in the specific way that, looking back, I recognize as a skill rather than a quality. The kind of charm that is performed rather than expressed, that makes you feel chosen rather than simply liked. He was not a student. He was 26, 4 years older than me, working what he described as a freelance consulting role that seemed to generate inconsistent income but never quite enough concern to investigate. He was attentive and funny and made me feel, in the way that certain people are very good at making you feel, that I was the most interesting person in the room. I introduced him to the savings account in the context of a conversation about moving in together after graduation. We talked about pooling resources for a deposit on an apartment. He was enthusiastic. He asked thoughtful questions. He suggested casually that it might make sense to move the savings into a joint account so we could both contribute to it going forward. I want to pause here and acknowledge something directly. What I did was not stupid. It was trusting. Those are not the same thing, and I spent a long time, longer than I should have, conflating them. People who are deliberately manipulative depend on their targets making reasonable, trusting decisions. The problem is not the trust. The problem is the person who chose to exploit it. I added him to the account in October. By the second week of December, while I was in the library at 11 o'clock at night finishing a paper on supply chain management, he had transferred the full balance to an account I had no access to and stopped answering his phone. I did not hear from Tyler again. Not then, not ever. The gas station parking lot was a Thursday. By Friday, I had filed a report with my bank and been told, with genuine sympathy and very little practical help, that because Tyler had been a joint account holder, the transfer was technically legal. There was no fraud in the traditional sense. There was no crime the bank could assist me in addressing. I called the police. They were kind and equally unhelpful. Civil matter, they said. You would need to pursue it through the courts. Do you know his current address? I did not know his current address. I did not know, it turned out, very much about Tyler at all beyond the version of himself he had constructed for me over 14 months. By Saturday, I had called my mother. That call, sitting on my apartment floor, trying to explain what had happened without crying, failing completely at the second part, is one of the most difficult conversations of my life. My mother did not have money to send me. She had her own bills, her own tight margins. She listened and she said all the right things, and I could hear in her voice the specific helplessness of a parent who loves their child and cannot fix what has happened to them. By Sunday, I had called my best friend Jasmine, who told me immediately that I was moving into her apartment's second bedroom for the rest of the semester and that she was not asking, she was telling. Jasmine is one of the clearest examples of grace I have ever encountered in a human being. She asked nothing of me except that I eat dinner at her table and let her be angry on my behalf when I was too exhausted to be angry for myself. I spent 2 weeks on her pull-out couch. She only had one bedroom. The second bedroom was a generous fiction, applying for emergency financial assistance through the university, stretching $43 further than $43 has any right to stretch, and trying to figure out how to finish my final semester with the money situation I now had. And then, in the third week, I went to class. My final semester included a course called Entrepreneurship and New Venture Development. It was taught by a woman named Dr. Karen Wells, a former startup founder who had built and sold 2 companies before transitioning to academia in her 40s. She was direct, unsentimental, and had the particular quality of someone who had been through enough to have no patience left for anything that wasn't real. The course's central assignment was a business plan, not a theoretical exercise, an actual executable plan for an actual business concept, with market research, financial projections, competitive analysis, and a pitch presentation at the end of semester that Dr. Wells graded with the seriousness of someone who had actually sat across from investors. I had started the assignment before everything with Tyler happened. I had a vague idea, something in the personalized gifting space, an online platform that would help people find genuinely meaningful gifts rather than defaulting to the same generic options. I thought it was a reasonable concept. I had not thought of it as anything more than an assignment. After what happened with Tyler, something shifted in how I looked at that idea. I started working on the business plan with an intensity I had not brought to any assignment in 4 years of college. Not because I had suddenly decided to become an entrepreneur. I had not consciously made that decision yet. But because I was furious and I was broke and I needed something to put the fury into, and a business plan was what was in front of me. I worked on it at Jasmine's kitchen table at 2 in the morning. I worked on it in the campus library between classes. I interviewed potential customers, actual people, 37 of them, in person and online, and I built their responses into the market research section with a granularity that went significantly beyond what the assignment required. When I submitted it, Dr. Wells gave me an A and asked me to stay after class. She sat across from me and said, without preamble, "Mia, I have been teaching this course for 6 years. I have read hundreds of student business plans. Most of them are competent. Occasionally one is genuinely good. This one is the 3rd plan in 6 years that I have read and thought this could actually work." I stared at her. She continued, "I am not saying this to flatter you. I am saying it because I think you should know that what you have written here is not just an assignment. It is a real plan for a real business. What you do with that information is up to you." I drove back to Jasmine's apartment and sat in the parking lot for a long time. When I went inside, I told Jasmine that I was going to start a business. She said, without missing a beat, "Okay, what do you need?" Let me be honest with you about what starting a business with essentially no money actually looks like, because the version of this story where I had a dramatic insight and immediately began building an empire would be a lie. What I had was a laptop, a business plan, Dr. Wells's words, Jasmine's pull-out couch, and a fury that had not diminished in 6 weeks. What I did not have was capital, a network, experience running a business, or any particular reason to believe that 37 customer interviews and one professor's encouragement were sufficient grounds for optimism. I graduated in May. I moved into the cheapest apartment I could find, a studio that was small enough that I had to choose between a desk and a dining table, and chose the desk. I kept my campus cafe job through the summer, working early morning shifts so my afternoons were free for the business. The business in those first months was not glamorous. It was a website I built using a free template, a social media presence I maintained with obsessive consistency, and a product I was sourcing, packaging, and shipping from my studio apartment with Jasmine's help on the weekends. The personalized gifting platform had evolved, through those 37 customer interviews and 6 months of additional research, into something more specific. Curated gift boxes for life transitions, job changes, new babies, moves, losses, recoveries, assembled from small independent makers, and personalized based on a brief questionnaire about the recipient. The concept was not revolutionary. Gifting boxes existed. What I was doing differently, the thing Dr. Wells had identified in the business plan, was the curation methodology and the emotional intelligence built into the product selection process. Other platforms asked what the person liked. I was asking what they were going through. That difference, it turned out, was everything. My first month of sales was $240. My second month was $410. My third month, after a post I had written about the product's origin story circulated on a parenting forum, was $3,200. I called Dr. Wells after that third month. She answered on the second ring and said when I told her the number, "I know, I've been watching your Instagram." Dr. Wells was connected in the specific way that former founders are connected, to people I would not have been able to access on my own. 8 months after graduation, she called me and said she wanted me to meet someone. His name was Marcus. He was an angel investor who had made his money in e-commerce, and who had, according to Dr. Wells, a track record of investing in early-stage consumer businesses run by founders who knew their customer with unusual precision. She said, "He is not easy to impress. I want you to go in there with your actual numbers, your actual story, and nothing exaggerated. He can tell when someone is performing." I prepared for 3 weeks. Not the pitch deck, I had that built in 2 days because the business plan Dr. Wells had already validated was the foundation. The 3 weeks were for the numbers, which I went through with a precision that I think surprised even me. Revenue by month, customer acquisition cost, repeat purchase rate, which was, and this was the number I was most proud of, 61%. 61% of customers who ordered once ordered again. That number was the business. Everything else was context. The meeting with Marcus was in a conference room at a co-working space. He was younger than I expected, mid-40s, direct, and possessed of the specific quality of someone who has heard enough pitches to have a very efficient internal filter for what is real and what is constructed. I presented for 22 minutes. He asked questions for 40, not hostile questions, precise ones. The kind that tell you the person across the table is doing real math in real time. At the end of the 40 minutes he said, "Your repeat rate is the number that matters. Everything else in this business can be built. That number tells me the product is right. What do you need?" I told him $50,000 would get me to the next stage, proper inventory management, a part-time hire, a real marketing budget rather than pure organic growth. He said, "I'll give you 50. I want 8%. And I want to introduce you to 2 people who will help you scale the operations side because that is where founder-led businesses at your stage most often break down." I said yes before he finished the sentence. The $50,000 from Marcus changed the pace of everything. But I want to be careful here about how I describe that change, because I think the mythology around investment capital is one of the most damaging things in the startup world. The money did not build the business. The money removed specific obstacles that were slowing down a business that already worked. That distinction matters enormously because businesses that do not already work are not fixed by capital, they are simply given a more expensive failure. What already worked was the product. The 61% repeat rate was real before the investment and remained real after it. What the capital allowed me to do was fulfill orders faster, maintain better inventory, hire Sophie, my first part-time employee, who handled customer service and packaging so that I could focus on product curation and growth, and run paid marketing that amplified the organic growth that had already been happening. Within 6 months of the investment, monthly revenue had crossed $30,000. Within a year, it had crossed 90. I moved out of the studio. I rented a small warehouse space for operations. I hired 2 more people. I launched a corporate gifting line, companies buying our boxes for employee milestones and client appreciation, that within 8 months had become 30% of total revenue and was growing faster than the retail side. Marcus introduced me to his 2 contacts, both of whom proved to be exactly what he had promised, operational experts who helped me build systems that could handle scale without breaking. I implemented their recommendations methodically, the same way I had built the original business plan, carefully, completely, without cutting corners because the corners were always where the problems lived. 2 years after that $50,000 investment, I raised a second round. Significantly larger. From a firm, not an individual. The valuation they put on the business was a number I am still not entirely comfortable saying out loud, because it does not feel like a real number when applied to something I started on a pull-out couch with $43 and a fury I did not know what to do with. I know you have been waiting for me to come back to Tyler. I have been waiting to get here too. Here is what I know about what happened to Tyler, pieced together from public records and one conversation with a mutual acquaintance about 2 years after everything happened. Tyler had done what he did to me before. Not identically, the specifics varied, but the pattern of building trust, gaining access, and disappearing was apparently not a first attempt. He had a history. Not a criminal record, because the legal technicalities of joint account access had protected him in the same way they had protected him with me. But a history. The last information I have about Tyler is that he is not living the life he thought he was building with the money he took from various people. I will not claim satisfaction in that. I find that I mostly feel a tired, distant pity for someone who is apparently constitutionally incapable of building anything real. Here is what I know about the $9,400 he took from me. He took 2 years of discipline and sacrifice. He took the specific security that comes from having a cushion between yourself and crisis. He took the option to make different choices in my final semester than the ones I was forced to make. What he did not take, what I do not think he even understood existed, was the fury. The particular, clarifying.